How's it going, everybody? I have my favorite real estate lawyer again, Greg from Alloy LLP. So today, I wanted to talk about selling your home with tenants in it. So generally, Greg, I want to loop you in. Most of the time when I run into clients that have tenants inside of the property, I typically tell them maybe we should wait until your lease is up or potentially negotiate to have them leave earlier. And the reason why that benefits sellers is if we can show the home in a better condition, typically we'll get a higher price for the home and the end result will happen quicker.
For sure.
Okay? So there's a lot of benefits for homeowners to sell their home without tenants up front.
Yeah, not even to mention the fact that the market for real estate tenancies right now is so hot that the lease you signed a year ago is probably worth $200 less a month than it is today.
Yeah, actually, before I get to my question, I'm seeing apartments that had rents from last year. Let's say they were renting for $1,200 last year. Market rents today for like a one bed, one bath apartment averages about $1,700-1,800. So it's just kind of, within 12 months, $600 difference.
Totally crazy.
But that's rental market aside. I'm telling my clients that there's a benefit to show your property without tenants up front.
Absolutely.
Now, I want to ask you as a lawyer, were there any cases on the back end, so like possession day, where it could benefit homeowners to sell their home without tenants in it? Have you run into any problems in the backside of the deal?
Absolutely. I had a deal a little while ago. As you know, lawyers can't really talk about who we worked for, but I can tell you general items and talk about kind of Yeah, it was John. That's right.
Yeah.
I always use John as my fake name, so we'll be talking about John today.
Yeah.
So John was a client who I had 3 or 4 months ago, something along those lines. He was selling a piece of property that had a tenant in it. He had spoken to the tenant about 6 months before the closing and said, "Hey, I'm selling this property. I would like to sell it untenanted. I wasn't initially planning on doing this. I thought you were going to stay in here for a long time, but situations change and life moves on." Tenant says, "Oh, okay. Well, I'm really sorry to hear that, but yeah, okay, yeah, no problem. I'll get out. I'll start packing my things now and get ready to move." John says, "Okay, great." Has some people tour the place. Somebody makes an offer. He says, "Great, I will accept the offer." And he calls his tenant, and he tells his tenant, "Look, you got 4 months. I need you out on this date because this is the date of possession." And he says, "Okay, no problem." A couple months go by, and the tenant now says, "Ooh, actually, I've been looking at the rental market, and everything costs way more than what I'm paying you. And I don't really want to leave. So I'm not going to leave. And if you want me to leave, you have to take me to the Residential Tenancy Dispute Resolution Service, which is the governing body for residential tenancies in Alberta."
Right.
Well, there was a term that was inserted into the contract under clause 9.2, which is kind of the free-for-all playground of the clauses for residential purchases, that read, "Tenants are to vacate by date X. If the property is not vacant from tenants on the closing date, the seller will pay 3 months of rent to the buyer and the security deposit as a penalty because the property is still tenanted, despite assurances that it would be empty."
Okay.
So this was designed to enforce or incentivize the seller to make sure the property was going to be vacant on possession, not that there was any chance that someone would remain in it. Because the rule of thumb with tenancies in Alberta is if you're buying a tenanted property, you are assuming that tenancy agreement unless the tenancy ends on the date you take possession or the day before you take possession.
Okay.
So these buyers had no interest in having the current tenant remain in the property, and so they inserted this penalty clause. Now, John didn't think twice when he signed off on the real estate agreement because he already had an agreement from the tenant that he was going to get out. It wasn't an issue. When the
Yeah.
tenant changed his mind, now suddenly he was facing a 3-month rent penalty plus security deposit.
So let me just get the stage right. So
Sure.
this tenant had proper notice from the seller, yes?
Unofficial notice because he agreed. My client didn't serve him proper notice because they spoke to each other, and the tenant said, "Yeah, no problem. Don't even worry about it. I'll be out."
He didn't get it on paper.
No,
Well,
just had a phone call.
let's say let's pause it here. Let's say that he gave him proper notice.
Yeah.
Would that have changed the situation at all, or the tenant can still cause him problems?
So the tenant can still cause him problems. Ultimately, a tenant can dispute an eviction notice. They can just ignore it if they want to.
Right.
And then the recourse for the landlord is to take the tenant to the Residential Tenancy Dispute Resolution Service, which I'm going to call the RTDRS from here.
Okay.
Now, in almost every instance, if service has been properly effected for notice of the termination of the tenancy, and the other party doesn't dispute that service was properly effected, the RTDRS is going to grant an eviction notice. It's going to happen. They're going to grant the order, and then in fairly short order after that, the tenant has to vacate the premises. And if they don't, then you can get a bailiff to come down and evict them. So it still can cause problems, but most of the time, tenants don't want to ignore official notices. They don't want to potentially get in trouble with the law. They don't want to potentially go before courts. Nobody does. Tenants included. So generally speaking, when notices are served properly and correctly, I don't see too many issues with tenants. But we still see them on occasion. I suspect I know what you're going to ask me next, which is how do we avoid those issues?
Yeah, because the thing is, like, if we serve proper notice, how could we get around? Because obviously in this case, it potentially could have delayed closing. That's number one. But not only did it delay closing for your client, it also cost him 3 months rent plus damage deposit, which, you know, it does suck, but at least he had an out.
Yeah, exactly.
So how can I protect myself as a landlord if I have a tenant? What do you think?
So my recommendation to clients who have tenanted properties and are looking to sell them vacant is have the possession date be a month after the date that you've served a notice for the end of the tenancy.
Okay.
So if you're taking possession, if you're selling on November 15th, I would recommend getting the tenant out by October 15th or earlier. The reason for that being, and I understand that for a lot of people that's a hard pill to swallow because you're going to lose out on a month of your rental income, and I appreciate that. But that gives you a month where if they decide on October 15th, no, I don't really feel like leaving, I'm going to stay. Okay, you immediately file with the RTDRS to get an eviction notice saying they've overstayed their final notice and they've overstayed the termination of their tenancy. You need them evicted yesterday because you're selling the property. A month should give you enough time that you can make an urgent application to the RTDRS, seek some damages, and get the tenant evicted prior to the actual closing date, meaning you end up with the property in a vacant state.
Easy peasy, no delays on closing.
Exactly, and that's my goal is to make all these closings as smooth as possible for all parties involved.
Awesome. Other than that sort of delay where a tenant doesn't want to leave, do you see any other conflicts, or is that kind of the end of the story for tenants on closing day?
That's really the one. I mean, the only other issue I've seen with tenants, and this is incredibly rare, are instances where the tenants leave the property really beat up. Yeah. Obviously, the downside of that is, you know, as the seller, you have to have the property in reasonable condition, the same condition as the date the offer to purchase was made. So if the tenants, you know, took a hammer to all the drywall, well, you got to fix the drywall. And it sucks, but it's what you got to do. Now, if they did damage in excess of the security deposit, you still need to get that damage fixed. But you can then pursue them either through the Residential Tenancy Dispute Resolution Service or through the now it's called the Court of Justice, small claims court. For
not only is it called the Court of Justice, it's Court of King's Bench now.
So we've got 2 courts in Alberta: Court of Justice, Court of King's Bench. But yes, we've decided to rename.
It's not the Court of Queen's Bench.
No. we got rid of that. They did also, as a fun side note, in the Court of Justice, increase the limit from 50,000 to 100,000 now. So the limit of what you can pursue in small claims court is now up to $100,000 in damages.
Okay, just for any litigious folks out there.
Exactly, of whom I'm happy to speak with.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's the only other one I see. But I mean, in that instance, it sucks. You got to eat some cost out of pocket. You got to replace. You got to fix the drywall in that example. But you have the right to recoup it from your tenants and to sue them in court for the balance.
Got it. And that also gives you another reason to want to have that potential 1 month buffer. Hey, closing days November 15. Let's get your tenants out October 15, because that 1 month will give us an idea of we got to do repairs.
Exactly.
Let's chase after the security deposit or whatever we need to do, so that way there's no more problems for you as the seller.
Exactly.
On closing day.
Yeah, and last thing you want is to get the tenants out on November 14th, closing November 15th, and realize, oh my God, the place needs a deep clean head to toe. The drywall needs to get replaced. We have to clean the carpets. Like that's the worst thing that can happen, aside from the tenant just overstaying. I
agree. Well, thank you again, Greg, for sharing the fun troubles of tenancy on possession day. If you're watching and you've got any legal questions about real estate, we'd love to hear it. We'd love to answer it on a different episode here. Thank you, everybody, for watching.
Yeah, thank you.